Not all people start families, and sometimes there really is no one to bring a glass of water in old age. Of course, money and hiring helpers can compensate for this, but it is no secret that friendship and love cannot be bought. However, as today's story shows, an enemy can be bought. Wisconsin, USA, is a small town with about 15,000 inhabitants near Milwaukee. The tranquility of the quiet town was disturbed on October 3, 2018, when Lynn Horner's caretaker, Jessie Kerchevsky, called 911. According to her, she had gone to the apartment of her ward and found 62-year-old Lynn lifeless, sitting curled up in a chair, surrounded by a bunch of medications. Jessie explained to the police that the deceased had been suffering from severe stomach pains for several months, which seemed to be getting worse. This was likely the reason for her voluntary death by a fatal overdose of medication. When the emergency services arrived, the paramedics declared Lynn dead. It was suspected that she had died of poisoning. Naturally, all necessary tests had to be conducted, including a toxicological examination, to determine exactly what caused her death. Lynn was immediately placed on the medical examiner's table, who took her blood and examined the tissue, whereupon a strange anomaly was discovered: a very high level of tetrahydrozoline. This substance is found in certain over-the-counter eye drops. The medication is used to relieve redness and inflammation of the eyes, which is very important in allergic reactions and even in simple fatigue. Just a few drops are enough, and the medication is safe when it gets into the eye's mucous membrane. However, if taken orally, especially in large quantities, it can be harmful and even dangerous. When a large amount of the substance is ingested and enters a person's stomach, it can cause vomiting, internal bleeding, memory loss, and, at high concentrations, even death. A very painful process, which aligns with the caretaker's descriptions of the persistent stomach pains that tormented the deceased. The medical examiner was immediately concerned about this strange choice of suicide method, since there are far less painful and quicker ways. A 62-year-old woman would hardly want to suffer for months to die. Most likely, her suffering was caused by a gradual increase in tetrahydrozoline levels in the blood. Based on this, the experts suspected that Lynn was a murder victim. According to the autopsy report, investigators agreed with this version and began investigating the crime. Lynn had no children and had outlived all her relatives. The first person contacted by law enforcement to clarify the circumstances of the death, even before the toxicological examination was completed, was 39-year-old Jessie Kerchevsky, a caretaker. She was the one who called 911 after discovering the gruesome scene in her employer's apartment. Jessie had been caring for the lonely Lynn for several years, and their relationship was described as friendly. In some ways, the deceased acted like a mother to her. Jessie felt that she was not just a caretaker, but had built a real bond with the woman. About 5 years before the described events, Lynn had developed physical and psychological problems. Lynn struggled with depression and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so she needed care. However, no relative could be found to take over the care. In her last years, the deceased suffered from many ailments, but none were as tormenting as the stomach pains of the last month. She could eat nothing but soup because she had problems with her bowel movements. Jessie strictly monitored her diet and medications. The caretaker was immediately invited to the police station to be questioned about the incident, while the medical examiners continued to analyze the body and collect samples for a toxicological examination. It was assumed that law enforcement would simply clarify the necessary information from the deceased's caretaker. However, almost from the beginning, things looked different. Jessie was not alone in the conversation. Her mother, Jennifer, was also present. The woman was equally concerned about the situation, suspecting that her daughter was in danger. She believed that the investigators might show undue interest in Jessie and try to accuse her of murder. However, the effect was the opposite. Instead of deflecting suspicion from her daughter, it only increased and intensified. The police tried to clarify with Jessie how such a tragic outcome could have occurred. Why had Lynn decided to end her life in such a painful way? At that point, no one suspected that Jessie had lied, and it was believed that Lynn had indeed voluntarily taken her own life a fatal dose of medication. However, the police officers found the caretaker's behavior suspicious. They wanted to know if there had been any prior conditions, such as a depressive state. Could the woman have tried to end her life earlier? What was the cause of the severe abdominal pain that the woman had? But Jessie could not say anything about it. It seemed she was not only distressed over her employer's death, but also underplaying something. Eventually, she was simply released for lack of evidence. The investigators waited for the official medical examiner's report after the toxicological examination. Upon receiving the report, suspicion against the caretaker intensified. In addition to Jessie, law enforcement was very interested in her mother. She was also contacted, and it turned out that she acted as a close friend to Lynn and had arranged for her daughter to work with her. Together with her daughter, she helped the woman deal with age-related problems and provided her with everything she needed. The mother also appeared suspicious to the police officers. Over time, these doubts grew stronger. The results of the toxicological examination seemed particularly strange. Despite her age and health problems, it was unlikely that the woman had been taking eye drops orally over a long period. It had to be clarified how these substances could have entered her body in such large quantities. According to experts, the lethal amount of the substance was contained in at least 4 bottles of the medication. The analysis results showed that Lynn had ingested at least 6 bottles, leading to severe stomach cramps and pain attacks. The symptoms escalated until the woman succumbed to them. Another peculiarity came to light almost immediately after Lynn's death. Jessie and her mother bought a large, expensive new TV, despite their modest income. Police then discovered that the deceased's car had been handed over to her caretaker, Jessie. Investigators observed the women's strange behavior. The longer the case lasted, the clearer it became that Lynn had not died voluntarily. Normally, criminals try to cover up the outcome of their nefarious plans, hide evidence, and do everything to evade justice. However, this did not seem to be the case. Investigators noticed that lies were creeping into the caretaker and her mother's words. Both relayed information in a way that confirmed Lynn had taken the medication herself to die. At the same time, the mother and daughter did not grieve the loss at all, rather enjoyed the inheritance they had received. Thus, suspicion against them grew. Law enforcement concluded that Jessie might have carried out the murder plan. Although her mother had free access to her friend's apartment, she rarely appeared there. Her daughter, on the other hand, was there almost daily for several hours at a time and had unrestricted access to Lynn's food and medications. Jessie continued to claim that she sincerely loved the woman and wanted to help her. They had become like a family. However, investigators were convinced that Lynn had made the fatal mistake of letting a potential murderer into her home. Suspects continued to show interest in the investigation, frequently calling the police station and inquiring about the progress of the case. They were not afraid of the events that had transpired, but rather, Jessie and her mother feared being exposed and kept a close watch on the investigation. The police recognized that more evidence was needed to ensure justice, requiring a comprehensive investigation. Naturally, Jessie and her mother could not help but notice the increasing interest of the police officers in their person. The caretaker immediately began to justify herself at every visit to the station, claiming that she had a heartfelt relationship with the deceased and that they treated each other almost like mother and daughter. Jessie insisted that any suspicion against her was unfounded, stating that it was mere coincidence that she was a caretaker and always in close contact with the woman, which of course did not make her a murderer. But the investigators did not rely solely on assumptions. Nevertheless, she initially did not comment on the increased levels of tetrahydrozoline in Lynn's blood. However, when cornered, Jessie revealed that the woman frequently used the drops, and Lynn could have used the medication when the caretaker was not around. She attributed this to the fact that the deceased had been diagnosed with cognitive problems, so she was not always fully in control of herself. Fairly quickly, the police officers found an important witness, a man named Andrew. He was not related to Lynn, but described their relationship as close and friendly. The woman befriended his family and became a kind of grandmother to the young man, even helping him financially while he was in college. Since she had no children of her own, she even offered him an inheritance. However, the young man declined this offer, not wanting his relationship with Lynn to be seen as driven by profit. Nevertheless, the woman insisted on transferring the inheritance to him, as she had no other heirs anyway. They never had time to discuss and formalize the matter, but according to the man, Lynn had offered him a sum of $10,000 to $50,000. Andrew regularly visited Lynn and was acquainted with Jesse. He believed that Lynn's death might be related to the caretaker's fear of losing the opportunity to get that money once she learned of the woman's plans to bequeath it to him. Strangely, the inheritance plans were never realized, for after Lynn's death, Jesse suddenly inherited the deceased woman's entire estate, which looked suspicious. After the woman's death, Andrew turned to her caretaker, hoping to receive some of the money. However, Jesse indicated that the deceased had many debts and had not paid her bills for a long time, so most of her money was used to settle debts. The man then decided to contact lawyers to verify all the information. Jesse then contacted him and agreed to a meeting, handing over documents proving the repayment of Lynn's debts. After settling all debts, Jesse allegedly had only $26,000 left, which she offered to split in two. When the police officers got hold of these documents, it turned out that they were forgeries created using computer software. Jesse had never paid anything to anyone. Investigators became interested in Jesse's and Lynn's financial affairs and began to examine this information closely. They quickly discovered that Jesse had made suspicious transactions with Lynn's finances over the years she worked as a caretaker. Jesse had filed loan applications with banks in her employer's name. The loans were approved and the banks granted them, all in the deceased woman's name, but the actual funds were used by Jesse. It turned out that she had borrowed about $300,000 over the years, with only $88,000 left at the time of the police check. In response to the financial demands of the police officers, the suspect justified herself in every possible way, claiming that all this was done at Lynn's request. She claimed that the woman had provided the documents for the loans herself and had signed them, and that Jesse had spent nothing. However, all the facts spoke against her. Regarding tetrahydrozoline, Jesse eventually stated that Lynn often asked her to buy eye drops, always taking a supply of 4 bottles at a time, which she then gave to her employer. The caretaker saw that her ward knew how to use the drops and administer them into her eyes, so she did not control the process. However, law enforcement officers were suspicious of her statement. No bottles of eye drops were found near the body at the crime scene. Instead, pills were scattered around, none of which were found in the victim's body. Jesse claimed that Lynn kept the drops on her nightstand next to the bed, but a thorough search of the apartment found them nowhere. The web of lies grew thicker, pointing to an apparent forgery. Obviously, someone had disposed of the packaging to cover their tracks. The medical examiner was certain that the deceased had been orally administered eye drops over a long period, leading to poisoning, unbearable pain, and ultimately death. Self-administration of so many drops before death seemed unlikely, suggesting that a poisoner was involved. Since Jesse spent most of her time with Lynn and was responsible for her food and medication, she became the main suspect. Interestingly, the investigators did not even call Jesse or invite her for questioning. She came to the station every time to see how the investigation was progressing. Caretaker continued to insist that she had no reason to kill the woman, excluding any financial machinations and money as a motive. However, the medication situation kept the investigators on their toes. Jesse was pressured, and the caretaker began telling incredible stories, claiming that Lynn supposedly liked to mix vodka with her eye drops, stating that this doubled the pleasure of the alcoholic drink. According to Jesse, she did not know that regular eye drops could be life-threatening and considered it a common female quirk. Jesse said that on that fateful morning, she had brought 4 more bottles of eye drops to the apartment. She continued, saying that Lynn even mixed the drops with water, and this had been going on for about 6 months before the tragic end. Obviously, the story became more and more bizarre, as Jessie hoped to clear herself of any charges, despite the evidence the investigators had found. The investigators were convinced that she was cornered and gradually making up excuses. Finally, it was decided to arrest the caretaker on suspicion of premeditated murder and tampering with evidence at the crime scene. Jessie's mobile phone was sent for forensic analysis, providing the police with even more material. It turned out that she was in constant contact with her boyfriend Scott. The dialogues between the couple interested law enforcement the most. As it turned out, the caretaker's excuses that she could not have known about the harmful effects of eye drops and their potential dangers when taken orally were lies. Jessie had spent a long time researching this information on the internet when she began caring for the future victim. During this time, she learned about products containing this substance very well, as if she had deliberately chosen medications containing this substance in large quantities. Naturally, eye drops were at the top of the list since they were the least suspicious. They were available in any quantity without a prescription. The only thing left to do was to convince the woman to take the substance orally, or to discreetly mix it into her food or drinks. Given her cognitive problems, this seemed an easy task. Her correspondence revealed that Jessie's boyfriend did not know she was trying to poison Lynn. However, a strange dialogue between the two young people took place a few months before the tragedy. Jess confessed that Lynn was in very bad shape. She had vomited blood, and that the woman had then been taken to the hospital. There, the doctors provided help and diagnosed tetrahydrozoline poisoning. It turned out that the caretaker could not have been unaware of the medication's effects. The police officers tried to determine if Scott might have been involved in the incident and summoned the man for questioning. He denied knowing about the poisoning. At the same time, according to Jessie's statement, he knew that her ward had been poisoned with eye drops. Nevertheless, he did not believe all these stories. Before contacting the police, Scott thought Jessie was a pathological liar. Their relationship was on the verge of breaking down. He was sure that the poisoning story was a figment of her imagination, made up to evoke his sympathy and make him reconcile with her. In September 2018, Jessie had another conversation with Scott. She reported that Lynn had again been poisoned by medication and was in the hospital. According to her, the ward was in intensive care and on life support. In reality, the woman was already dead by this time. Scott had had enough of the relationship and wanted to end it for good that day. Jess tried again to deceive him, arousing sympathy with her reports of her employer's serious condition to keep him. But could she have used the person she called her second mother to pretend to be poisoned to get her boyfriend back? Could her mistake have led to a fatal overdose, or was it a carefully crafted plan to seize an elusive inheritance? Jess had two main motives. She wanted money, of course. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans taken out in Lynn's name had to come to light at some point. It's possible the employer discovered all this, leading to her own downfall. Jessie took possession of the woman's property and money. The second motive was the desperate desire to maintain her relationship with her boyfriend. Scott had repeatedly talked about breaking up, and Jess covered herself with the sick woman's condition to manipulate and keep him. Thus, the suspect surrounded her life with a web of lies that even the investigators could hardly penetrate. Despite all the investigators' efforts, Jess never admitted her guilt. She continued to claim that Lynn drank vodka daily and added the drops voluntarily. In October 2023, the trial began. By then, the investigators had unraveled the full extent of the accused's financial fraud. It turned out that Lynn's credit limit had increased from almost $0 to $2,000 since 2016. This was just the beginning. After her death, almost $16,000 was stolen from the woman's apartment and used to pay off some of her debts. According to Jessie, she only repaid the loans in Lynn's name. However, the origin of all these amounts was determined. The debts were interconnected. Jessie had taken out loans in her employer's name totaling about $300,000. Additionally, valuables worth $150,000 were stolen from Lynn's apartment after her death. Initially, everything had disappeared. But it turned out that Jessie had almost immediately received money in her accounts after her ward's death. This was probably money from the sale of Lynn's belongings. Lynn herself was a wealthy single woman who hardly ever used credit cards or loans. It was not unusual for her to possess all these things, making the sudden, rapid increase in debt, which began immediately after hiring a new caretaker, very suspicious. During the investigation, officers found that Jessie gambled at casinos every month and spent large sums with her boyfriend, who knew nothing of the money's origin. The couple visited gambling establishments at least twice a month. The investigation also revealed that Jessie had a criminal record. Despite her young age, the accused had a rather extensive criminal record involving forgery, fraud, and gambling. Since 2010, she had suffered from severe gambling addiction. In February of that year, Jess defrauded two people of $4,000 by taking out loans in their names. Although she did not use forged documents, it was proven that the funds were obtained solely through fraud. By 2010, Jess had lost over $45,000. During this time, she borrowed another $2,500 and also applied for a loan of over $6,000 using her mother's documents, claiming Jennifer had approved the loan. Of course, this was a lie, like everything else. As a result, Jess received a loan of over $2,500, secured by her mother's car. Fraudster never repaid this amount, and her mother almost lost her car. She had to gather a large number of documents to prove she had not taken out these loans. During the investigation, the woman was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but never served the full sentence. Being released early, good behavior. However, the mother claimed that her daughter was severely addicted to gambling. Prosecution insisted that the 39-year-old Jess committed premeditated murder, financially enrich herself at the expense of her victim. Additionally, she could write off all the loans she had taken out in the name of a sick woman who suffered from cognitive disorders and allegedly recklessly went into debt. During her detention, the poisoner confessed to a cellmate about killing Lynn. However, she claimed she did it because the woman had been suffering from pain and a progressive illness for years. In the caretaker's view, it was an act of mercy, as she could no longer watch the person close to her suffer. According to the defense lawyers, Jess did not kill her ward. The woman did indeed suffer from cognitive disorders, progressive illnesses, and stomach pain. According to Lynn's defender, she took vodka with drops to induce a kind of euphoria. Her employer convinced Jess of the necessity of such therapy, emphasizing that it made it easier to sleep, so she administered the medication without realizing the potential dangers. According to the prosecution, Jessie gave her employer water with 6 bottles of eye drops on the day of the murder, although the actual lethal dose was 4 bottles. During the trial, the accused confirmed that she had given Lynn water with the contents of 6 bottles of eye drops to drink. Initially, the caretaker was against it and advised Lynn not to take the drops, but after a long argument, she relented, not knowing that the drops could be so dangerous. Jessie then left for a few hours to run errands, unaware of how much water, the substance her employer had actually consumed, and how it would affect her. Given that Lynn had previously visited the hospital, where the drops were diagnosed as poisoning, the woman's version of accidental poisoning seemed untenable. Lynn was likely well aware of the dangers of eye drops, so she probably would not have taken them again. Jessie was also aware of the dangers of tetrahydrozoline, and the main argument against the caretaker was the fact that not a single bottle of drops was found near the body. Someone had clearly helped the woman drink the medication. Trial was open and very emotional, the judge actively participating in the discussions. On November 14, 2023, the jury found Jessie guilty of first-degree murder, as well as theft of property, money, and tampering with evidence. Upon hearing the jury's decision, Jessie broke down in tears. Jessie received a life sentence, eligible for parole after 40 years. Jessie's mother and boyfriend were never charged. While behind bars, Jessie continued to weave her web of lies. A friend of Jesse came to the police station sometime after the hearing and handed the officers a letter. It turned out that the poisoner had written detailed instructions on how to falsify evidence for her words. The intent was to create a voice recording of Lynn expressing her last will and stating that she was voluntarily ending her life. For this purpose, electronic voice changers were to be used. Jess described in detail how to find the deceased's recordings so she could know what the forgery should sound like. This letter contained a kind of script that the friend should repeat exactly on the recording. According to the story, Lynn complained of short-term pain, health problems, and depression, which led her to want to die. Additionally, the woman not only had to inform about her intent to die voluntarily, but also bequeath all her money, property, car, and other belongings to Jesse, everything of value that the criminal had stolen. Poisoner approached this matter very responsibly, preparing detailed instructions, describing how to alter the voice, and creating a series of forged documents. She detailed what needed to be written and how it needed to be sealed. Jess was clearly well-versed in fraudulent schemes and techniques, which could lead to another charge of murder, since she encouraged her friend to commit a crime. The friend was supposed to manipulate the records and information to make it appear as if the entry was made 2 days before Lynn's death. Jess begged her to do this, promising money and asking that she not inform the police under any circumstance. Fortunately, her friend did not heed these warnings and did not manipulate the recordings. It is now being decided whether Jesse will face new charges for tampering with evidence. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.